All right, get ready for a deep dive, everybody. This one is part school project, part ecological thriller, and a huge lesson in how biodiversity policies often clash with, reality.
Yeah, it's quite the story.
We're joining two 11-year-olds, Kesser and Steen, who are working on their school's Nature and Innovation project.
Not your average school project, though, is it?
No, not at all. They're searching for what experts call older nature types. Think rare plants, special habitats, ecological gems that have been around, well, for ages.
Like little time capsules of nature?
Exactly. And their town actually thinks that some of these older nature types might exist nearby. So Kesser and Steen are using this book by a leading biodiversity expert as their guide.
A real expert in the field.
Oh yeah, top-notch. They're out there identifying plants, watching animals, even exploring a dramatic cliff by the fjord.
Sounds exciting.
They've found some pretty amazing things like rare plants and even a bird-eating spider.
Wow, a bird-eating spider.
Yeah. But while they're exploring this cliff, they overhear some adults talking about a planned harbor extension. And, well, that's when things take a bit of a turn. Okay, see, this cliff, it's not just any cliff. It's got these sacred springs that were used by Vikings.
Yeah.
The boys immediately started worrying about what this construction might do to the area.
Makes sense. Vikings, sacred springs, harbor construction. It's quite the mix.
And get this, they found some old documents that say this whole area might be protected. So now you've got these 11-year-olds uncovering a potential conflict. A harbor expansion may be threatening a protected area.
Talk about a real-life mystery.
We're talking biodiversity policy versus, what's actually happening on the ground.
It's a classic example of how protecting biodiversity is, well, complicated. You can have all these laws and rules, but putting them into practice, especially when there are developers involved, that's a whole other challenge.
All right, let's talk about Kesser and Steen's research for a minute. They're using this book to identify and observe different nature types, right? So what exactly are these older nature types and why are they so important?
Well, you can think of them like snapshots of the past, habitats that have existed for a really long time, relatively untouched by humans. And because of that, they often have unique species and ecological processes that you wouldn't find in, say, newer, more disturbed areas.
So they're really important for biodiversity.
Oh, absolutely. They're like biodiversity hotspots, crucial for the overall health of the ecosystem.
Okay, so we've got our junior biodetectives carefully observing and documenting everything they find, and then boom, this harbor expansion enters the picture. What can you tell us about it?
Well, the proposed expansion of Linnes Harbor is all laid out in this legal document. It's located south of Linnes, southwest of Hundsted.
Okay.
And it's planned in stages. In fact, stage 1 is already built.
Stage 1's already built.
Yeah. But there's been some pushback, particularly from the Danish Nature Conservation Association. They've actually filed an appeal against the whole project.
So that's where things really heat up.
Yeah.
What are the conservationists so worried about?
Well, their main concern is the impact on what are called red-listed species. Think of the red list like a warning system. It lists species that are, threatened or endangered.
Oh, okay.
And the worry is that the harbor extension could harm these, these already vulnerable populations.
I'm guessing they're also concerned about the impact on the cliff itself, especially with those Viking springs you mentioned?
Oh, definitely. The appeal specifically mentions concerns about changes in light and shadow on the cliff, which could really harm some of the sensitive plants there.
Oh, I see.
Plus, they're worried that all the construction is going to mess with the water flow, potentially creating this big swampy area and making it hard to, walk on the nearby path.
So it sounds like there are a lot of delicate ecological balances at play here.
Yeah, it's a pretty complex situation.
So you've got the conservationists raising the alarm. But on the other hand, you have the developer and the authorities pushing for this expansion. What are their arguments? What are they saying?
Well, the developer and the Kystdirektoratet, which is basically the Danish Coastal Authority, are arguing that the current harbor is just too crowded. They say the expansion is absolutely essential.
Interesting.
They also claim that the project won't have a big impact on the environment, especially the cliff area. And they're really emphasizing the economic benefits, new jobs, more tourism. Plus, they're pointing to the fact that they've included a recreational area in the plans.
So it's that classic dilemma, economic development versus protecting the environment. But how likely is it that this expansion won't have a big impact?
That's a tough one. It's really hard to predict the long-term consequences of a project like this. And, well, history tells us that developers don't always have the best track record when it comes to taking care of the environment.
Yeah, good point.
And in fact, there's an interesting little twist in this case with the permit.
What happened?
Well, it seems the developer went ahead and built stage 1 of the harbor extension without getting the proper permits first.
Seriously?
Yeah. And then the authorities granted the permit afterwards, which, raises some questions about how accountable and transparent the whole process really is.
That's a bold move by the developer. Doesn't exactly make you confident in their commitment to following environmental regulations, does it?
Not really.
So what happened with the appeal? Did the Danish Nature Conservation Association manage to stop the expansion?
Sadly, no. The Miljøog Fødevare Klagenævnet, which is the Environmental and Food Appeals Board, they ended up upholding the Kystdirektorat's decision to go ahead with the expansion.
Oh, wow.
They did acknowledge the concerns raised by the conservationists, but ultimately they didn't think those concerns were enough to, overturn the decision.
Wow. So even with legal protections in place and a conservation group actively fighting against it, they're still going ahead with this project. That's pretty discouraging, especially considering how passionate Kessler and Steen are about protecting this area.
It is disheartening.
It's almost like their little school project has turned into a window into this much bigger battle.
It really has. Kessler and Steen's experience perfectly shows just how challenging biodiversity conservation is all over the world. You have all these policies and laws designed to protect sensitive areas, but the reality is that those protections often clash with development pressures and, well, money.
And if a developer is willing to just build without permits, what does that say about how effective those regulations really are?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It really makes you think. It's like this whole harbor project has become, I don't know, a living example of that, saying the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry.
Yeah, definitely.
You've got these kids, Kessler and Steen, super excited to, explore nature, and suddenly they're caught up in this really complex situation where the future of this unique area is, well, uncertain.
It really shows how everything's connected, We tend to think of biodiversity conservation as something that happens in, far-off rainforests or pristine wilderness.
Right.
But this case shows that it can be just as relevant, right in our own backyards.
And it's not just about the ecological impact either. Remember those Viking springs Kessler and Steen were so interested in? This area has a lot of cultural and historical significance too, and that could be lost or at least diminished if this harbor expansion goes ahead.
Yeah, you're right. It's not just about protecting plants and animals. It's also about preserving, a sense of place, a sense of history, the things that connect us to a specific location.
Those things are important.
They are, and they're often hard to, quantify or measure, but that doesn't make them any less important.
What really strikes me about Kessler and Steen is their determination. They're not just accepting what they're told. They're digging into archives, finding old documents, basically challenging the official narrative. It's pretty inspiring to see that kind of initiative, especially from kids that young.
Yeah, for sure. Their story is a great example of what we call citizen science. They're asking questions, looking for evidence, and holding, the people in charge accountable. And they're showing that you don't need to be a scientist or a politician to really engage with these issues and make a difference.
So what can our listeners learn from all of this? What can we do if we're concerned about biodiversity loss and, want to get involved in protecting these areas?
Well, I think the first step is to educate ourselves. Learn about the unique ecosystems and species in your own area. There are often local conservation groups already working to protect these places.
Right.
And they're always looking for volunteers and support.
So true. It sounds like Kessler and Steen's project has become a much bigger lesson than they probably expected. It's not just about identifying plants and animals anymore. It's about understanding how policy, development, and conservation all interact.
It's complicated for sure.
And realizing that, we all have a role to play in shaping how those forces interact, whether it's supporting conservation efforts, advocating for stronger environmental laws, or even just making more sustainable choices in our own lives. Every action contributes to a larger solution.
I think that's a really important point. Kessler and Steen's story also highlights the power of questioning things and challenging assumptions.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that even the smallest voices can make a difference when they're armed with knowledge and determination.
They really show that you don't have to be a scientist or a politician to be an advocate for the environment.
Right. We can all contribute to creating a future where both people and nature can thrive.
This case in Denmark might seem far away for some of our listeners, but the issues it raises are, I think, universal. The tension between development and conservation is happening everywhere, And understanding how those forces interact is, well, crucial for making informed decisions about the future of our planet.
It's about recognizing that our choices have consequences, you know? The decisions we make today, both individually and collectively, will determine the kind of world we leave for, well, for future generations.
And that's where Kessler and Steen's story gives us a little bit of hope. It reminds us that even when faced with these really big challenges, there are people, young and old, who are passionate about protecting the natural world. And that passion, combined with knowledge and action, can really create change.
I agree. It's about empowering ourselves with knowledge, connecting with others who share our concerns, and using our voices to advocate for, for the changes we want to see.
It's about taking action.
Absolutely.
Makes you wonder what Kessler and Steen will do next. You think they'll keep being these amazing advocates for, for their local environment?
Oh, I think this is just the beginning for them. They've had this incredible experience, right? They discovered all these historical and ecological connections, and they've seen just how complicated these issues can get. That's powerful stuff.
It really is. And their story goes beyond just this one harbor project. You know what I mean? It really speaks to a bigger conversation about how we define progress and what role we want nature to play in our future.
You're absolutely right. It's all about finding that balance between human needs and protecting the environment. We hear a lot about sustainable development these days, but actually putting that idea into practice, making those tough choices, well, that's where things get real.
Yeah. Kessler and Steen's project and this whole situation with the harbor expansion, it's like a perfect example of that challenge. It forces us to ask, like, what are we willing to sacrifice for progress? And what are we willing to fight to protect?
Those are the questions every community has to deal with. And it's not always about finding the perfect solution, is it? Sometimes it's more about finding the least harmful option, the one that, minimizes the negative impacts as much as possible.
And that's where I think being informed is so important. Kessler and Steen were able to make a difference because they took the time to learn, to research, to really understand the complexities of this whole issue.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, right? The more we know about the natural world, about how ecosystems are all connected, about what could happen because of our actions, well, the better equipped you are to make choices that benefit both people and the planet.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a little challenge. Take some inspiration from Kessler and Steen. Get curious about your own local environment, learn about the challenges it's facing, and find ways to get involved. It could be volunteering, supporting conservation organizations, or even just talking to people about these issues.
Even the small things can make a difference. Plant a native tree in your yard. Cut down on your plastic use. Support businesses that, care about sustainability. Talk to your friends and family about these things. It all adds up.
Kessler and Steen have shown us that you don't have to be a certain age to make a difference. They've reminded us that passion, curiosity, and a willingness to learn, well, those can be incredibly powerful forces for change. Let's all try to embrace that spirit and work together to create a future where biodiversity can thrive.
I couldn't agree more. It's been a fascinating deep dive.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.